Welcome to Southern Sense Talk on Rumble. You are going to love Annie the Radio Chickadee Ubelis and her co-host, C.S. Bennett. You'll find them live here on Fridays from 2:30 p.m. to 4 p.m. Eastern Date Time. Check out their website at Southern Sense, as in commonsense.net. It's that easy, southernsense.net. So sit back and relax. They're informative, fun, irreverent, and politically incorrect. You never know where they'll go, but you'll love the journey.
All right, and welcome to another adventure here on Southern Sense. Oh, what did it just do? Come on. What did it just do to me? No, there we go. It's misbehaving already. It's not even me this time. Not messing up the start of the show.
That's pretty quick. You kicked me off.
Well, it's not behaving the way it should be. There we go. All right, let's try this again. All right, 16 years and I still can't start off right. Oh, you're here watching and listening to Southern Sense. I'm your hostess with the least talent. And my co-host is rolling her eyes. We have Hannah Davis from fairus.org. She's the investigation immigration manager. She's the one that's exposing all the fraud that's going on in the background.
We try to.
The lady with the thumb on the pulse of the nation. We got ourselves a fantastic guest. He's going to be joining us a little early. Steve Bonta. He is the publisher of the New American magazine, which is run by the John Birch Society. And some of the stuff they have been exposing, which has been helped by the exposure of the Epstein files about what is going on globally and how it is affecting us nationally. I mean, it would scare the bejesus out of you. However, a lot of us have been ringing the bell, saying this stuff is going on behind us. No one's paying attention. Sooner or later, it's going to slap us in the face. And we weren't even members of the John Birch Society. We were just people like other podcasters that picked up the pulse, that felt these things going on in the background. And finally, the nation is starting to watch and listen, which is a good thing. It is a very, very good thing. So we have a lot to talk with him about. And one of the things I wanted to mention, Hannah, before we start the show, is the passing of Ted Turner.
Yeah.
And I think the CNN news started by Ted Turner originally was an unbiased news source. And my late husband and I would sit up. There was a team that worked the late night, from 12 to, 4 or 5 in the morning. And when we went to bed, we would turn them on.
Yeah.
And we would get good, honest news exposure.
Yeah.
Not a ton of editorials, not a bunch of talking heads out there. You had people that actually knew the news and read it to you truthfully.
Yeah. I think, Ted Turner was a visionary. He developed the first 24-hour news network. I think ultimately what he wanted was an informed audience rather than what we've got now, which is an indoctrinated CNN audience. I think a few good quotes from him. He talked about checks and balances in the news cycle quite often into the 80s to the late 2010s, talking about how not only should we have unbiased media, but we should have media that portrays positive stories on top of negative stories. We can't inundate the public with negativity all the time. And so, and he talked about how we should have, he was known for the crossfire, CNN crossfire, people talking back and forth about different policy topics, having right-leaning viewpoints and left-leaning viewpoints, and of course the positive and the negative news stories. And I feel like CNN has gone way off the trail that he had made. And I wonder in his last years, he just died a few days ago at 87, right? I wonder in his last years what he thought about the network that he founded. I do know when he was younger, he was more conservative, and as he grew older, he became more left-leaning, but I still wonder if he saw the bias that CNN peddles out daily. I wonder what he felt about that. But
well, we can't forgive him one thing.
what?
Marrying Hanoi Jane Fonda.
Yeah.
But
Yeah.
the heart wants what the heart wants. So you
Yeah.
can't completely fault him.
You
As long
can't.
as he was happy in his home life.
He wasn't using his brain, maybe. But
No, he's using something else.
I think CNN, they've abandoned the principles of fairness,
Yeah.
this, and I believe since 2017 they've lost about 40% of their audience. And so and that could be partially to blame. And that could be partially to blame because we've been inundated with an increase of news networks that we can decide to watch. But I think also a good majority of that's to blame for their news cycle. Not only is it redundant, it ignores truth, especially when it comes to immigration. I mean, they don't talk about migrant crime. They downplayed the Biden border crisis. They referred to as the over 10 million illegal aliens that came in under Biden as a migrant wave that is just supposed to ebb and flow as the pendulum swings between presidential administrations. And none of that is true, that none of that was normal, and they downplayed it all, So I think people have caught on to that downplaying, and they've caught on to the angles that CNN uses and what they peddle, these leftist talking points, and people are sick of it.
Yeah, absolutely. So when we do the dedication today, we're not only dedicating it to our fallen hero, we're also dedicating it to Ted Turner and those who are in the media that follow his belief that it should be unbiased, it should be fair, you should give the good and the bad. Give the public something to give hope to. Because if you hit them with negative after negative after negative, then what's the point? Why even turn on the news?
Why even tune in?
When you can bury yourself in an Avatar movie or a game, a video game, or whatever. Well, what's the point of tuning in if all they're going to hear is something that's going to make you feel sad?
And on the flip side of that, what's the point in tuning into media that is only telling you what you want to hear? It's the same thing. Like, people who are right-leaning, they shouldn't only be watching Fox or Newsmax. They need to watch some mainstream media as well that's unbiased. They need to take the bias out of it, and so we can form our own opinions. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
And media doesn't start or end on the TV. Read a book. Read history. Read the print newspaper. It's dying. We must read it. We have to support local newspapers, and I think it's great that we're going to be honoring Ted this afternoon. So I think that's a fantastic idea, Annie.
All right. Well, with that said, we're going to go and do our dedication a little early because we have so much to go over, and I want to talk to Hannah about what's going on with the birthright citizenship, the Southern Poverty Law Center, which has affected FAIR, and then there's something that your FAIR has done. It's called the New American Immigration Council.
Very exciting.
Yeah. So, hey, we got good things happening. With that said, today's show is going to go out to Deputy Sheriff Thomas Walker LeMay from the LeFlore County Sheriff's Office in Oklahoma. His end of watch was Sunday, April 19th of this year.
Let's get to more headlines here. What started as a welfare check in LeFlore County this weekend turned quickly into a deadly ambush involving the first responders.
A county deputy was killed and a suspect is in custody this morning. Investigators, they say that the officers here were shot almost immediately when they got there. A gunfight lasted for hours before the suspect finally surrendered around 4 Sunday afternoon.
Our thoughts and prayers are with the entire LeFlore County community, the town of Worcester. There were no other subjects involved. Nobody else is at large, so the community is safe at this time.
They are still trying to figure out what the motive may have been. Across LeFlore County, across the state, there's been an outpouring of support. Law enforcement agencies sending their condolences to the sheriff's office.
LeFlore County Sheriff's Office. Today I have the news of a heavy heart to announce a line of duty death of one of our own, Deputy Thomas Walker LeMay. It is with profound sorrow that the LeFlore County Sheriff's Office announces the line of duty death of Deputy Thomas Walker LeMay, who was shot and killed on April the 19th, 2026, while serving and protecting the citizens of LeFlore County. Deputy LeMay was a dedicated law enforcement officer, a proud father, a loyal deputy, and a trusted friend to many. He represented the very best of our profession. He was one of our tactical members too. His courage, commitment, and selflessness service will never be forgotten. His loss is deeply felt across our department and throughout the community he served so faithfully. The LeFlore County Sheriff's Office extends its sincere gratitude to the numerous law enforcement agencies, first responder agencies, and all the civilians and everyone that has stood up, represented, come to us. We appreciate the media too, the outcry and the outreach for help for the family or any of the friends, and for our officers or deputies involved. We have every agency involved around helping: the Oklahoma Highway Patrol, other sheriff's departments, the FBI, the OSBI, DEA has offered assistance. We have had phone calls from here all the way to Washington for condolences and any help for the family or support for law enforcement. We respectfully ask that you keep Deputy LeMay's family, as well as his brothers and sisters in law enforcement, in your thoughts and prayers in the days ahead. I'll release further information as it becomes available. I'll take just a few questions, and that's it. So, Brett.
How are you guys doing? I can't remember anything like this happening anytime since I've been.
I can't either, Brett. I can't either. You know, we've had numerous officer-involved shootings, both with the municipalities, both with our department too, and OHP involved. But we have not had an officer down that I can remember. We did have one down at one time from a car wreck, but for in the line of duty being shot. And I'll just pass this along real quick before a lot of questions. Our deputies was there on a trespass call and a welfare check, and they did make contact with the suspect. The suspect is in custody. It was about a 3-4 hour standoff, 2-hour shootout. Multiple agencies, U.S. Marshals showed up to back us, OHP's TAC team, U.S. Marshals, fugitive teams, everyone pulled together, the whole community did. Agencies come from all over, local, federal, state. Yes, they haven't been a tragic incident like this that I recall since our last one over in Fort Smith with Martinez. Danny, knew him very well, worked with him numerous times. Our thoughts and prayers go out to the family. He lives behind a mother, a stepfather, and a father, and numerous family members, a sister and a brother, and a 5-year-old daughter. Please keep them in their prayers. Pray for our law enforcement. We do appreciate what the community did. Everyone that was in the procession bringing Walker back today, seen the community come out, seen y'all come out, the media, everyone. I want y'all to know everyone appreciates it, from the federal level down to us. It shows us that y'all still care. It shows us that you still support us. Not just this community lost a law enforcement officer. The whole nation did today. Again, we got to get behind us. We got to have law. Even if some don't want it, we got to have it. To preserve the peace and preserve the liberty and the justice of this country. I'll take one more question.
Is there a GoFundMe set up for Walker's family?
Do what?
Is there a GoFundMe set up for Walker's family?
Right now we are working with the, forgive me on the acronym, I think it's called 106. We are working with the Officer in the Line of Duty Down program. Oklahoma Bureau of Narcotics has offered contacts for that, and so has the federal level. They have too. So as far as the GoFundMe, I don't know if one's set up yet. Okay.
In closing, what do you want people to know, the community know about this 30-year-old deputy who served our community?
He's a great man. He was taken from us too soon. He stood up for what was right. He worked out all the time. He was on my TAC team. He trained all the time. They were ambushed during the trespassing call. Numerous of us was pinned down. Y'all pray for his family and for his daughter, and pray for our officers, all of us that was there, and the troopers that was there with us when we was able to get him out. God bless y'all. Thank y'all. Forgive me if I have not called y'all back. This is very trying and tasking, and as I get more details, I'll push it out to you. Thank y'all, and God bless. Have a good night.
Let it be said, when we finish this race, we kept them free, we led with grace. Let it be seen, from sea to shining sea, beautiful America, living our legacy. Oh, Father, Mother, Sister, Brother, oh, we gotta learn to love each other. Oh, for the soul of the nation, for the next generation. Let us be known as people of honor, humble and bold, faithful through fire. Let us hold firm to our convictions with wide open hearts, eager to listen. Oh, Father, Mother, Sister, Brother, oh, we gotta learn to love each other. Oh, for the soul of the nation, for the next generation. Let us make room. Let us reimagine, welcoming voices with true compassion. Let's craft a world with hopes and dreams, challenges known and those still unseen. Oh, Father, Mother, Sister, Brother, oh, we gotta learn to love each other. Oh, for the soul of the nation, for the next generation. Let us be sure, when our time has come, we gave them hope, we made them strong. Let it be said, when we finish this race, we kept them free, yeah, we led with grace. Oh, Father, Mother, Sister, Brother, oh, we gotta learn to love each other. Oh, sister, brother. Oh, we gotta learn to love each other. Oh, for the soul of the nation, for the next generation.
Okay, and we're back. That one was a little bit tough on me because when I was watching it, I flashed back to standing at attention, White Glove, with Eddie Burns' funeral, who was murdered on the orders of a drug lord as he was guarding a witness's house. That he was a friend of mine. We studied together in the academy. I think that was the hardest. And then there was my other friend, Bob Machadi, killed by an illegal alien who had been deported 3 times by another friend of mine who worked for INS. Came back the 4th time to take his life. So these mean something to me, and that's why I'm honored to do them. So it's for all our fallen heroes, whether they be law enforcement, first responders, firefighters, EMS, whether they be our men and women that have served this nation from its very birth through today and into our hopeful history. So God bless each and every one of them. With that said, just get my happy face back on. We have our guest already in the green room staring at us going, what the heck are these 2 ladies doing to me? Let's bring on from the New American Magazine, a member of the John Birch Society too, Dr. Steve Bonta. Good after, Dr. Bonta.
Hello. Can you hear me?
Yep, we got you loud and clear.
Okay.
Loud and clear. All right, well, we're glad to see you, glad to have you join us. My co-host, Hannah Davis, she is the Investigation Immigrations Manager for FairUS.org. So we get a lot of the insights. Because some of what's happening does deal with immigration that we're seeing with this new global trend. And I keep on asking, if no other nation in the world except ours has open borders, what does that mean for our security and our future?
Yes, well, that's not a rhetorical question. But at this point, obviously, we don't have open borders. This may be a very, very brief sunlit interlude. And if we get a Democrat back in the White House in 2028, obviously things are going to change drastically. We can hope that doesn't happen, I guess. But I really don't know of any other country in the world that has anything like the insanity of the American immigration policy. And I've lived in a number of foreign countries for a number of years of my life. And regardless of whether they're communist dictatorships like the People's Republic of China, where I lived for 4 years, or relatively free and open country like Argentina, where I spent a year of my youth, or Spain, where I spent almost 2 years. The consensus outside the United States seems to be that national borders are still a thing. They're sacrosanct, and you don't get to play fast and loose with the immigration laws. In some countries, like India, for example, the penalty for disobeying the immigration laws is going to prison. And you don't want to go to jail or prison in a place like India.
No.
Other countries summarily deport you. I don't think anyone necessarily imposes the death sentence for being in the country illegally, but you get deported or imprisoned or fined, and sometimes all of the above, as a matter of course. There are, of course, exceptions now, the European Union, Australia, some countries like this that are becoming also obsessed with this idea of overturning their entire demographic and their culture via immigration. So I guess it isn't unique to the United States, but it seems like the entire world is tumbling to the fact that, we are a world of sovereign nations. That is not going to change anytime soon, and we'd better start acting like it.
Yeah, well said. I think that's the hallmark of all sovereign nations, is that they enforce their border security and their interior enforcement laws as the rule of law. And it's something I've noticed. You mentioned Australia and you mentioned Europe, and they're kind of pushing their laws to the wayside as we have been. And I know the pendulum swings between presidential administrations, but you said it great, Steve, when you mentioned that in the next few years we could have a Democrat in office and we go back to the Biden era policies. And what will we look like after that? God willing. And what if they have 8 years in office? What will we look like after that? So it was all well said. I don't think that the media helps. I think that this narrative that's been pushed that, if you're in any way, shape, or form pro-immigration law, you must be a fascist or you're akin to the Gestapo or whatever. I don't think that helps. And I think the mainstream media is, parroting what, unfortunately, these elected officials are saying regarding immigration law. And it's just so interesting to see how what was once a very non-polarizing, non-political topic has become one of the most, one of the most polarizing topics there is now. I can't think, outside of maybe abortion policy, I think it's probably one of the most highly contested topics there is. And I wonder what it's going to look like in 8 years, depending on who's in office.
Yeah, well, I mean, you have, I think it's non-controversial that the United States has always, and there's certain countries like the US, Canada, Australia, Argentina, aforementioned, and some other countries in Latin America as well, have long relied upon immigration as a source of national vitality. And yes, diversity to a degree, to the extent that diversity confers a sort of a broader spectrum of genius and abilities and all of that kind of thing. I don't think anyone would argue, well, some people perhaps do, there are some people who genuinely don't want any foreigners coming here, but they're in a small minority, and that's generally an inaccurate caricature of those of us on the so-called right. The issue is there going to be any semblance of control? And ironically, in the past, when it was much easier to immigrate to the United States, it's a very difficult process now to get a green card. I know because my wife is a Chinese national, and it took us several years to go through that process. And she was finally able to immigrate legally last September. Okay. And she's doing everything she can to be a responsible, she's not a citizen, but she's, trying to work and earn money. She studies English very hard every day, obviously keeps her nose clean, all the rest of this. And the majority of immigrants who come in legally are going to behave like that. In past times, it was much easier to immigrate. You showed up at Ellis Island or some other point of entry, San Francisco Bay. You went through some tests and basically a process of several hours. And if you passed them, you were allowed in. The difference was that there also was not the enticement associated with all the welfare state stuff. And so America in those days only attracted people who were truly entrepreneurial, willing to take the enormous risk of going to a completely foreign land, sometimes without knowing the language, relying on people from the mother country that were already there that could help them, but knowing that they weren't going to get a hand up from the state or local government, that was just not contemplated. And if you fell sick, you had to pay your own medical bills and all the rest of this. So that was a natural selection, selector that kind of, people self-selected and most of them preferred to stay, for all the flux of European immigrants that we had during the 19th and early 20th centuries, the mass majority of Europeans stayed in Europe. And why? Because the mass majority of them, like people anywhere, abhor change. They weren't, they saw the problems in their homeland, but ultimately it was what they knew, it was what they were familiar with. They received benefits of one sort or another from staying there. And so they chose to stay. And that was the state of affairs until comparatively recently. And now, someone living in some country in, Eurasia or Africa or something like this, looks at the United States, well, we're as foreign a country as we ever were, but now they know if they can just get in here. First of all, they probably can never be thrown out, even if there's a removal order of them. All they have to do is just evade authorities and not show up for court hearings, and they can still get a social security number, get work, apply for government benefits, which is a big deal. And of course, if they have children, the children automatically become citizens and on and on and on. So who wouldn't want that?
Yeah.
In exchange for that, yeah, okay, there's problems with the fact that you're in a new culture, different language. If you come from a strict Muslim country or some culture like that, that's very much at variance with our own, there's a lot of culture shock, a lot of issues. So, but who cares? Because you're going to get the goodies at the end of the day, and it's worth it. So the whole mentality, the entire thing, as with so many things, immigration has been weaponized and politicized by the left. It's a worthy institution. And it is certainly part of our American tradition. But like so many other worthy institutions, like universities, let's say, it's been taken and twisted and diverted from its original purposes and transformed, in this case, into a weapon of radical political and social reform, demographic change.
Well, you hit so
Well
many
said.
topics
We need to
as
have
you're
him
talking.
on some more.
I believe
Take my
as he's
spot.
going through this, I caught maybe about 15 or 20 different topics I wanted to hit on, but they went so fast because, here in the United States, we were developed and designed by our founding fathers to have citizens, not subjects. And you mentioned Europe. I'm only second generation American. 3 of my grandparents were from Europe. 2 served in the U.S. Army during World War I. Out of 3 out of my husbands, 2 were immigrants. One from Havana, and the other one from Latvia. And they are fiercely. Actually, the second one was fiercely American, and so is my current one. When you meet his family, the huge Cuban crowd, you hear it in their voices, in their posture, in their mannerisms. They don't like this new immigration. But when you look at our history, it came from mostly England through the idea of King Harold codifying common law, where a man had the ability to defend himself, who had the ability to have a voice in government, to own property, and to be viewed at that point as a subject. Then you throw it into the Magna Carta, which then led to our Mayflower Compact to help set the basis of what Thomas Jefferson and Benjamin Franklin wrote in our Constitution. And then take that with the heritage of the American Indians, with their national, what do you call it?
The Iroquois Confederation.
Thank you. I had brain fart. So much is touching on my mind as we go through this. And yes, Europe at one point was proud of its heritage, its traditions. But with the migration coming in through Europe, as widely as it is here in the United States, they're losing that. They're losing that. And we're trying to preserve it here, but our culture is also being destroyed from within. How dare you say we don't accept Sharia law over our Constitution because you're Islamophobic? How dare you say that I can't impose Sharia law in the neighborhood I live in, so if someone comes in, I can take them to Sharia court? The Hasidic Jews tried that in New York City. It didn't work out too well. They were told under no circumstances. But they were allowed to have it in New York City, in Texas, in Minneapolis, and throughout the rest of our nation. It's madness that we're facing at this point. And I'm glad the New American and people like you are out there to expose it.
Yes, well, and I mean, implicit in all of this discussion is that this is being done by design. It's not just sort of happening. These aren't just amorphous social trends. I mean, certainly ideas do have a power of their own to captivate people. And the idea of America, the melting pot without borders, so to speak, is a powerful one, and it's very persuasive for many people. But that said, there are people who curate these ideas and package them as propaganda. And as the rather lurid cover of our latest special issue of the New American implies, we believe, we're not afraid to affix the C word to it and call it a conspiracy, a political conspiracy, a little bit different from, the mafia or something like that. But it's a very definite, organized effort with malice aforethought, contrived with the end of destroying the American Republic and, writ large, Western Christian civilization. I mean, and this is not a new thing. It has fairly ancient roots, but it has gained extraordinary vitality in our time. And this is something that I think causes a lot of people, people look at the way that the people who are masterminding this grand plan to bring about the dissolution of the United States, and they just throw, how can we possibly fight? These people are so well funded, and this and that and the other thing. And they apparently, as we saw with the Biden administration, they have the conjurer's power to simply throw open the borders, and voila, 20 million people troop into the United States without an invitation, and they're absorbed here. And then Trump is reelected ostensibly to clean up the mess. And then when he tries to do it, suddenly, voila, a flourish of the wand, and suddenly you have a conjuring of rioting and demonstrations coordinated in major cities and civil unrest to create this illusion of widespread discontent with the idea of rounding up, particularly the more criminal element of the illegals here and the ones that are openly, and in some ways contemptuously defrauding the government, like the Somali population in Minnesota and this kind of thing, and so they do have tremendous resources at their beck and call to create the illusion, number one, of irresistible force, and number two, of broad, widespread, grassroots consensus that ultimately we need to keep doing this, when in fact a large majority of Americans, more than 80%, I think, may dislike Trump personally or disagree with this policy or that, but they're on board 100% where the immigration thing is concerned. And yet, with all that, we can still contemplate a possible catastrophe at the polls this year and 2 years from now that would lead to the same reversal that we saw in 2020, where Biden had not been in office 72 hours and had reversed everything Trump had done with regard to immigration with the stroke of the pen, and commanded the ICE to stand down and basically let people walk in unmolested, and create apps for their phones, so while they're in Mexico they could plan how they were going to come in, all this sort of thing. It's absolutely astonishing, but it is not unopposable. But people have to understand that this is being done deliberately. It's not being done by a bunch of blind idealists. I mean, there are some on the fringes who are blind idealists who are committed to some sort of impossible utopian cause. But it's the cynical insiders in this know very well what they're doing and why they're doing it, and they are up to no good. They're certainly not doing it for the benefit of all the Somalis and all the Nicaraguans and the Venezuelans and the Zambians or whatever who are coming into the United States. They're doing it so that they can create so much chaos here that people will, that the whole notion of America and rule of law and the Constitution and everything that constitutes the so-called American dream is fatally discredited in the eyes of the majority. And then they'll have essentially a free hand backed by the will of the people. That at least is the expectation, and that is the plan.
That's well said. I do want to push back a little bit. You said Biden had the power to do what he did in regards to immigration. I do think that, he circumnavigated Congress. He was derelict of duty. He usurped the rule of law. I mean, he was 90% of the things he did were inherently illegal.
No argument here. Yeah. But a lot of what every president does now is illegal, and the majority of what Congress legislates is illegal when measured against the standard of the Constitution. Yeah. I mean, if you look at Article 1, Section 8, which enumerates the powers Congress is to have,
13
with the understanding that the 10th Amendment makes crystal clear that if it's not enumerated, they can't do it. And yet, 90% of everything we spend federal monies on is on things that are illegitimate by that. And so that's the legislative branch. Meanwhile, the executive branch, well, we could go on about that too. So I mean, no, absolutely, I agree with you. Biden did many illegal and illegitimate things, but de facto, he got away with it.
Yeah.
And so, the fact, I mean, I don't see him doing the perp walk for it. I don't see Hillary Clinton or any of these other malefactors doing it. Barack Obama and all these other people who have done these sorts of criminal things. And a large part of that, I think, is because we have been lax in electing representatives who have the spine and the backbone and the understanding to hold people like that accountable.
Right.
So we end up with a federal government that for which the Constitution is de facto, not de jure, but de facto a dead letter. In so many ways.
Unfortunately, it sets a precedent that it can be done again, depending on the president's political leanings or what they want to control outside the rule of law. I wanted to know if your book goes into anything. You said we allow all these migrants in to destroy us from within, and that's a common trope we hear, and I agree with. But I was wondering if it parsed out anything about how ultimately I think a lot of this humanitarian open borders approach is done to eventually control elections, to where everybody who comes here illegally votes left.
Absolutely. That's very, very clear. And it already has a tremendous effect. I mean, Exhibit A being the state of California. which, lest we forget, once upon a time had governors like Ronald Reagan and later Pete Wilson. Now, Pete Wilson was sort of what we would call a rhino today, but he was a Republican. He was, in fact, the last Republican to be governor of California, and very few people, I don't think anybody under the age of 30 even knows there once was a Pete Wilson. How did that come to pass? Well, it was primarily because of the Reagan era mass amnesty that took place. And then, the successive waves of immigration have totally changed the demographics of California. Because here's an unpleasant truth. Two unpleasant truths, and they're related. One is, again, if you erect this massive and, again, constitutionally illegitimate system of federal welfare, okay, that's going to it's going to incentivize the wrong sort of people to come here. That's Exhibit A. Exhibit B is, if you have no real test for residency or citizenship, aside from being a carbon-based life form with a pulse, then, and in particular, if you attract people from countries that have been, like Mexico, for example. I like Mexico. I've been down there a number of times as a tourist. But Mexico is a socialist country. A lot of people don't understand. The Mexican Revolution was the first modern communist revolution. Okay? Before Russia even. That's what the Mexican Revolution was about. Those people were basically communist gangsters. And Mexico, to this day, they were never able to completely put it into force, but Mexico had its own cultural revolution. Long before Stalin imposed one on Russia or Mao on China, Mexico had the Cristero period where they tried to eradicate Christianity. And there was the whole Cristero war and everything. And that didn't work. It ultimately fizzled out and turned into a sort of a milquetoast socialist system that they've had ever since. But the bottom line is, if you grew up in Mexico, you're from a country that has no cultural memory of a free market capitalism, no cultural memory of limited government. Mexico was the second federal constitutional republic. When they first became independent from Spain, they briefly called themselves an empire. And then they decide, we're gonna try to do what that country north of us is doing. We're gonna create Los Estados Unidos de Mexico, the United States of Mexico, complete with a federal government. In fact, in Mexico, as you know, the federal police are called the federales. So Mexico has a federal system, and it's the second country in the world to have one, like ours. They had a written constitution, all this. And today, they're a socialist basket case. So guess what? You get lots of people coming in from Mexico. They may make wonderful salsa and do really cool things on Cinco de Mayo. I mean, I love Mexican culture. I'm fluent in Spanish. I like Latin America a lot. But you're not going to get a lot of people who are going to be, sympathetic to, going to be familiar with the principles of John Locke or the free market or something like that. That's just a reality. And this becomes more the case if they're coming from some Central American country like Nicaragua or Honduras or something. Again, and I've been to Central America too, and I like it. But those are poor, uneducated, and largely socialist redistributionist countries. And mutatis mutandis, the same can be said of the countries of the Middle East, leaving aside the Islamic culture factor, which is an additional issue. But again, and I spent some time in that part of the world too, and you take away the oil revenue, and what you've got are, you got what you had 100 years ago, which is basically, authoritarian sandboxes, in effect. Okay, again, I love their food and they're wonderful people and all that kind of thing, but they don't have anything approaching, our tradition of individual liberty and free markets. And the enemies of our country understand this very well. Lots of them, in their youth were Peace Corps volunteers in African countries or Latin America, this kind of thing. I mean, a lot of them, and they know very well that the people that are coming out of these societies have this this mentality of dependency on government. So, of course, we want them here. Speaking as because they will bring that same tendency, and their default setting is, if there's a problem, government needs to solve it, and that is so antithetical to the American tradition.
Well, again, you hit so many different topics, making my mind go a mile a minute. And I did read the magazine, as you can see, a lot of the little tabs all over it.
Okay.
Notes. Because when I was reading the article that your co-author William Jasper wrote, made me reflect back, and in 2018, 74% of Americans said that globalism basically was fine. That's in 2018. I'm wondering what the number is today. You're talking about 8 years later. And we're talking about how South America and Central America are by nature more towards socialism, communism, than they are towards the federal freedom that we have. And it brought me back to a trip I took from Cartagena down to Bogota. And my heart breaks to see the disastrous Cartagena. It's so beautiful at one point. But in Bogota, we were warned, stay away from the soldiers. Don't go near them. Don't try to take a picture with them, whatever. And that night, a bunch of us went to a private nightclub. It was a downstairs basement nightclub, private. And we were the only Americans there. Next thing you know, the soldiers are coming into the nightclub. And the nightclub, I think that at that time, the annual dues was $2,000. So they're not supposed to have these guys walking in. Because, part of that dues is going to the government to buy off the police. And the next thing you know, I've got a rifle in my head, demanding my papers. I don't know, typical American that I am. Maybe I'm just a little more gutsy than most people. I looked at my glass of scotch in front of me. I took a sip, and they're looking at me. What are you doing? I said, it's a good scotch. I'm not going to waste it. I said, the last thing I do, I'm going to take a sip. And the soldier called me loco and everything else and walked away. But can you imagine that being in your life on the street every day when you're living with it? And this globalism is going to bring that life here.
Well, I mean, one thing that I think, socialist or not, globalism they've never been able to sell that at the grassroots anywhere, even in a place like China. I mean, one of the things that the communists in China have discovered is that the global version of communism is not appealing. The Chinese are very nationalistic, and they're, justifiably proud of what they've accomplished in the last few decades, with their economic rise and everything else. So the Chinese Communist Party has tried this new tack where they're basically saying, well, we have, we have what they call socialism with Chinese characteristics, 中国特色社会主义, and that's a phrase that they've popularized, which is basically national socialism, which is quite similar to, Hitler and the Nazis. And this, so it turns out national socialism is a thing with a lot of leftoids. Because people are naturally patriotic. But I wanted to, regarding Latin America, I mean, I should amend what I said. There is a lot of change going on, particularly from like Costa Rica and Honduras south. It doesn't include Mexico at this point, unfortunately, but there have been a number of countries. Argentina is probably the best known, but also Chile, Paraguay, Uruguay went back, but Ecuador, and probably this year Colombia, that have elected so-called right-wing governments that are very much, in the case of Javier Milei, the president of Argentina, brilliant guy, very well versed in the writings of free market economics, and Argentina itself has a pretty, despite their fraught economic situation, has a pretty proud tradition. They're also a federal republic, by the way, and their constitution was inspired by a man named Alberdi, a scholar from Argentina who traveled to the United States and Europe and studied constitutions and stuff like that. And so they have this heritage of themselves. And Argentina, I spent a lot of time in Argentina. I love the country. Brilliant people, amazing talent base, like the United States, kind of a melting pot. Buenos Aires is a fabulous city, but you don't hear the left in the United States talking about how we need to bring in more immigrants from Argentina and Chile and Uruguay, do you? Because they know, well, those countries are full of really smart people, and we don't want to bring in smart people who are actually going. I mean, there's a few, Juan de Maldacena, the famous physicist, is from Argentina, and he's at the Princeton Institute of Advanced Studies, and he's making all these contributions to theoretical physics. So a few of them get through, but by and large, you don't hear them agitating for bringing in immigrants from Japan and Korea, do you? Right? Because they come here, they work hard, they're high achievers, they keep their noses clean. They tend to be less political than people from, say, sub-Saharan Africa or the Middle East. So they're not going to be reliable assets of the Democratic Party, aka the American Marxist Party, that's trying to accomplish these malign goals. So, but I guess I would say that globalism is not the only area where they've kind of made some progress in changing people's minds is with the radical environmental stuff, because almost everybody now, including a lot of people who ought to know better, buy into the whole climate change.
Don't say sustainability around me.
Yeah, well, but the point is that word, that's a word that they have successfully planted in hearts and minds all over the world. And so a lot of people who are otherwise very sensible will say, yeah, but we got to do something about the climate, and we got to do something about the sustainability crisis and all this type of thing. And so in that area, the globalists have made a great deal of progress after their fashion with the Paris Accord and promulgating all these new regulations, the carbon caps and all the Agenda 2030 and all this stuff. That has proven to be something that just an irresistible set of talking points. So that's difficult. But in other areas, countries seem to prefer their sovereignty. And so in that sense, we don't see a global taxation system yet, or a global military, or all these other kind of nightmare scenarios that we worry about, and we still worry about. I mean, that's not to say that that'll never happen. It could, and it certainly is what the globalists would foist on us, were they able to muster the political capital to do so. But up until now, they haven't, with the sole exception of the environmental conceit. It's proven a very difficult sell. And what we're seeing now, at least selectively, in some parts of Europe, particularly Central and Eastern Europe, as well as Italy, and in Latin America, particularly in South America, to a lesser extent in Central America, we're seeing a recrudescence of what used to be called conservatism, but nationalism and more interest in individual liberty and a repudiation of collectivism along with it.
Well, I want to mention that you recently were on another podcast that's done by a friend of mine. I found out as I was looking for the video of any recent podcast you did. And next thing I know, I'm up watching the video, and Bill Martinez is texting me.
Oh, Bill, yes.
So,
love Bill.
Yeah, I've known him for quite a while. Matter of fact, his son came over for Thanksgiving one year when he was still in boot camp. But one of the things I found very interesting and I loved is that you went into the CPUSA, and they morphed the name and changed it, but they're still getting their marching orders, not from Moscow, not from China, but they're getting them from within here, the United States, from New York City, from DC. And what blew my mind is that the one time Hillary Clinton came out from her shadow, and she said, "I am a progressive." And I'm thinking, finally, she said something. Oh, and by the way, first vote I went to vote for president was not Jimmy Carter. So that puts me way back. So, I'm listening to people coming out of the closet now, embracing more of communism, socialism, all these things, and they're out in the open. And anyone who tries to criticize them or try to show them the other half, what we're standing for, they attack us. And then they put these straw men in front to help battle us. But it's all BS. It's all carefully staged on their end.
Well, it's always been the so-called left that have been the violent ones and the combative ones and the ones who are willing to stoop to any low to accomplish their ends, because of course their ends are sacred, and therefore the end justifies the means. And so this is nothing new. It goes back at least to the French Revolution, where you see this clear asymmetry between the two sides. But I do think people, addressing your earlier point, I think people, fail to appreciate the degree to which modern leftism, socialism and even communism are actually being enabled by Western money and Western power. I mean, it's a pretty well established fact, for example, that the Russian Revolution was partly financed by Western bankers, Western interests. And it's also a well-established fact. My colleague Bill Jasper has forgotten more about this than I'll ever know, but he'll tell you that the revolution in China, the Communist Revolution, was clearly aided and abetted and supported by figures in the United States and Europe and so forth and so on. So this is not a new thing. And even now, I mean, you kind of see echoes of this. So everybody a few months ago was applauding the Trump administration for his expeditious summary deportation of Maduro and his wife out of I said deportation, spiriting them away from the presidential palace from Caracas and bringing the United States to face justice.
I would say importation.
Yeah.
Well, this took place quite some months ago.
Yeah.
But here's a curious fact. Venezuela is still a communist country.
Yeah.
Still run by the communists. And I don't see any effort underway on the part of our leadership to change that fact. Okay? And we're seeing something similar with Iran, by the way. I mean, Iran, the militant Islam of Iran is really another very important international arm of the radical left, which is why the leftists have been so opposed to, they care about women's rights and all this when it's in Gaza, but when it's in Tehran and in Iran, they don't care. Suddenly, they don't care that they're literally butchering. They killed tens of thousands of women and men and boys and girls. I mean, it's an absolutely abhorrent regime. And by the way, this does not mean I necessarily support the war. That's another issue. There are other issues involved, but still, they're clearly upset that there's a danger that these monsters might be overthrown. Okay. And so, again, and what do we see? Trump went into the war. I will say a little bit about the war. Trump goes into the war, characterizes them in the blackest hue. They're about to build nuclear weapons. No U.S. president's done anything about this for 49 years, on and on and on. And what are we doing now? We're sitting there doing nothing. And under the delusion that a blockade of the Strait of Hormuz is going to unseat these guys. It's not. What they're doing right now is they're racing to rearm and do whatever they can and getting ready to unleash hell on their citizenry again to make sure that they don't get any idea of rising up. So why the flip-flopping? I mean, it's insane. I mean, Trump commits the country to this war and talks like, okay, we're going to do this like the old days. It's only going to end with their unconditional surrender. And then all of a sudden, let's make a deal. And it turns out, well, they're not so bad after all. We killed some of the worst ones. It's absolutely absurd. And you look at this and say, what is the unseen hand that's causing it? Because Trump is not a stupid man, but somewhere in his administration, something is happening that's saying in effect, oh, no, you don't want to actually overthrow the regime, just kind of knock them down a little bit. And, it's absolutely ludicrous. So this war is turning into just another feckless war, just like the occupation of Iraq, just like Vietnam, just like Korea. It's another one of these globalist projects, in my opinion. And that's only now beginning to become evident. And I can see this. I mean, I follow the Iraqi expat, some of their prominent podcasters. And you can tell they're all very glum now. They're starting to realize, okay, Trump really isn't going to follow his promise. There are other forces maybe more powerful than he that have decreed an end to this thing, and he's looking for a way out, and he doesn't care. So why did we go in the first place? What was the point? It's just, I mean, one can argue, well, they might have built nuclear weapons. Okay, but so to me, even that, which was originally sold as a new, robust America First form of foreign policy, is looking more and more like the old foreign policy, which is globalism first. I mean, I hate to have to say this because I did cast my vote for Donald Trump, less than 2 years ago. But I call it as I see it.
Well, inside the magazine, this month's issue, you have an excellent reference section because I was thumbing through trying to get to your article, and all of a sudden I came across this huge glossary of CFR members, people that are in the shadows of our government. And you do it from 1933 through to today. And there's great fold-out things. And you'd be absolutely stunned to see some of the names. And one of the names came across, Richard Nixon. And I remember, as young as I was at the time, getting ready to start learning more about politics. But my parents had me reading the New York Times when it was really good news. Richard Nixon, if you go look back at the ping pong policy, and here he's talking about the dominoes falling in Vietnam, and then he makes what do you call it? The gesture towards communist China with this ping pong policy.
Right.
And I'm screaming at the TV, the nightly news. What are you thinking? Have you really thought this through? Who told you?
Well, and now we know the
thing.
answer to that. In hindsight, it was Kissinger and others of the
course.
so-called brain trust. And I will say this about the Trump administration 2.0. It has fewer members of the CFR. For listeners who are not familiar, is the Council on Foreign Relations, which is like the flagship organization of the American, political establishment. And we'll just leave it at that for now. But there's a lot more that could be said. And the Trump administration has very few. The most prominent is Scott Bessent. He is a CFR member. But this is the first administration, I think, in living memory for which all of the major cabinet positions, Secretary of State, Secretary of War / Defense, and so forth, were not CFR members. I mean, almost always they have been, and including in the Ronald Reagan administration. And so, and the CFR is a good example of a claque of individuals. Not all of them are, I'm not saying they're conspirators or anything like that. It has several thousand members, and a lot of them are, people of good faith, although they tend to, be left-ish in academia, the media, politics, the upper echelons of business, and so forth and so on. But the core group in the CFR, the ones that have the administrative positions that guide the policy, that they frame policy, and then somehow mirabile dictu, it becomes the policy of our government. Those people are globalists. And globalism, to some degree, is kind of beyond left and right. It's an ideology that ultimately says, if we're going to solve mankind's problems and create some approximation to a paradise on Earth, it can only be achieved by abolishing independent nation states and setting up some kind of a world government. And people don't use that term so much anymore. They talk about global governance, and they talk about a world order. That is a term that they use. It's not just something that, the tinfoil hat community likes to bandy about, right? That's a term that they use, but that's what they're referring to. And so to some extent, you find people in the CFR who are both Republicans and Democrats, and in other globalist organizations like the Trilateral Commission, and now, the World Economic Forum and organizations like this. So it does transcend a lot of these partisan convictions, but the shared conceit is that the current state of affairs of sovereign nations and what they like to call international anarchy is unacceptable, and we have to find some way to usher in a golden age of what Tennyson once called the Parliament of Man, a global government in some form or another. So that's what globalism is, and it's kind of has the people who support a lot of it's kind of almost a quasi-religious fervor with which they support it. And this is not well appreciated at the grassroots. Most people in the grassroots don't understand the degree to which globalists, A, their interests are interlocked, and B, the ability they have to, to plan. I mean, we've tried to follow all of the weird, obscure meetings that go on in the United Nations, because more often than not, they lead to the promulgation of more global regulations. I mean, like they're trying to tax, right now they're trying to impose the first ever carbon tax on shipping fuel, because there's an obscure United Nations organization that purports to regulate international shipping. And it failed last year. The Trump administration use some maneuver to get rid of it, but they're going to come back and try again next year in the year, and eventually they're going to get it. And so little by little, the House of World Order, as Richard Gardner once called it, is being erected bit by bit over time, and largely by consent. And again, by design. It's not something that's just happening. Globalists are, most of them, I think, are intelligent, well-educated elites, and they know what they want to achieve. And they also, they're visionaries after their fashion, right? And so they say, well, if it takes another 100 years and I'm not around to see it, so be it, but I'm going to contribute to this grand project. And there's been for the last 100 years, 150 years, so there's been a broad consensus about this, certainly since the days of Cecil Rhodes and people like that this is what is necessary to reform and rehabilitate the human race.
Would you say the only way to push back on globalism is to get rid of all neoliberal institutions like the EU or NATO, or is that what you're saying?
Well, I guess by implication, what we advocate at the John Birch Society is, if we could, we'd abolish them, but we don't necessarily have that power. But we certainly do have the power to withdraw from the so-called neoliberal institutions, because like it or not, they do serve as conduits for essentially old world ideas to come in and contaminate the new. Now, what do I mean by that? Europe, and I like Europe, okay, but Europe is a very, very different place from the United States. The doctrine of uninhibited free trade and things like customs unions and other stuff that has come out of that is a European product, and it's actually, it goes back a long ways. I mean, there have been all the way back to ancient Greece. There have been attempts to set up, trade zones and confederations of countries that speak the same language and all this sort of thing. The reason being that no one European nation has in and of itself all of the necessary natural resources to become wealthy. They're all dependent on trade to one extent. They're literally dependent on trade, okay? Because the countries are all small. And so this is the reason that the Europeans devised the doctrine of free trade, which is a reasonable doctrine, and if there were no such thing as politics, free trade makes eminent good sense, if there are no such thing as sovereign countries. The United States, though, has a very different situation geographically, and the founders understood this. We had no necessity to rely for other countries on trade, except for a few things. I mean, obviously, they can grow better mangoes in Mexico than we can in the United States.
Wine in Italy.
Yeah, although, the wine.
Well, France will argue that.
I hear tell, so I mean, but the point is, we have the lumber, we have the water, we have the minerals, we have the fisheries, we have the game, we have the, to furnish us with every, and even, the latest thing we hear about, we can't decouple from China because we get our rare earths from them, and rare earths are
no longer.
No,
very soon it's going to be right here in the Appalachian Mountains.
Oh, for crying out loud! There's rare earth all over the place. The reason we have self-sabotaged, as in so many other ways, or allowed our betters, so to speak, to sabotage for us. It's why we don't build nuclear power plants anymore. It's why we don't build factories anymore, and it's why we allow our leaders to erect a system of confiscatory taxation and regulation that has driven industry out of the United States, because it makes no logical sense. People say, well, industries, they're going to relocate to China or Indonesia because it's cheaper. But then you say, okay, how is it cheaper exactly to go to a country that speaks a language that doesn't resemble English at all? Okay, train everybody there that you need to speak that language, to understand all the technical jargon associated with your industry. That's a lot of man hours right there to affect that training. Teach them how we do business, how we manage our plants, how we, do quality control and everything else. Build the factory, and then we ship all the goods all the way across the Pacific Ocean back to the United States. And somehow that's cheaper than building a factory right here in the US. Well, the reality is it is cheaper. So you ask why? Well, it's because cost of labor is lower in China. Okay, well, that begs the question, why is that the case? And the answer is because now in the United States, we have so many, the Chinese, here's the irony. Again, I lived and worked in China for 4 years. I paid much lower taxes to the government of China than I did here in the United States. And I got paid much better than I got paid here as a teacher, okay? There's a reason that people went to China at the time. And actually, the tax system there is comparatively simple, believe it or not, considering the authoritarian nature of the government. I'm not trying to minimize that, but I'm saying that there are reasons, and that but it's insane on the face of it. And we've done it to ourselves, that companies would rather go even south of the border and build a maquiladora in Mexico than build it in the United States, because we've allowed government to drive up the cost of manufacturing and the cost of labor so much that it's no longer attractive to locate here, right? So that is, and so that is all coming about. because this is a long-winded way of saying it's come about because of our adherence to the essentially old world conceit of free trade over everything else. And people are starting to question that and say, wait a minute, what does that imply? Okay, so that's one example. Another example is socialism writ large. Where did socialism come from, and Marxism? Well, it was devised by a bunch of European guys. People like to make jokes about dead white guys. There's a big difference between, a dead white European intellectual and a dead white American farmer, let's say. Okay.
Oh, you mean like the German philosophers that helped train Woodrow Wilson?
Exactly. Right. Okay. So our membership in an organization like NATO, for example.
I get it. This is Theodore and Woodrow by Judge Napolitano.
Oh, okay.
Whitaker Chambers by Sam Tannenhouse. Whitaker Chambers, The Witness by Buckley and Novak. And I have even more on my shelves.
Yeah. Well, I mean, what we have done is we've allowed ourselves to be persuaded that our way of doing civilization is deficient.
Right.
The old world way is better. With all of the multilateralism and the free trade. Multilateralism, by the way, started right after the Napoleonic War was ended, with the Holy Alliance and the Quadruple Alliance and all that stuff. And then the so-called Concert of Europe, which ultimately gave way to the League of Nations after World War I. All of that, when you look at Europe, you kind of say, okay, the whole system of alliances and multilateralism and free trade and customs unions and all this type of thing kind of makes sense if you're in a continent of all these countries that are so prone to fratricidal warfare, which has happened so many times in European history. I can kind of understand why they want to set up a European Union in some form, but it has no relevance to our situation.
No.
And what's more, the intelligentsia of the old world are largely post-Christian. Okay, that's the dominant trope now. Europe is, as you mentioned earlier, is in the process of renouncing its Christian heritage. Okay, and we are unabashedly, at least among Christian countries, nominally Christian, we're probably the most religious, and we don't want to go that direction. Our whole civilization is premised on Christian values. It doesn't mean you have to be a Christian to be an American. That's not what I'm saying, but it does mean, like it or not, that's where we come from. Those are the ethics and the morals that inform our legal system. And we took certain good things from Europe. We took the ideas of Sidney and Locke and Montesquieu and others, and then synthesized them, and then threw in a dash of Thomas Jefferson and Ben Franklin and John Adams and James Madison and all the rest of them, and created this new, I guess I can use the R word, revolutionary form of civilization.
Yes.
And so in my view, allowing ourselves to remain entangled in all of these alliances, which, by the way, the American founders recommended against, all these alliances with the old world, both economic and political and military, all these types of things, and I'm referring also to Asian alliances, not just European. Effectively says in effect, well, we're not really comfortable with who we are. We kind of want to renounce part of that and try to be like the rest of the world. And being like the rest of the world means embracing collectivism and embracing multilateralism and embracing socialist planned economics and embracing censorship to some degree, because as we all know, free speech is a dangerous thing. You can't just let people say any old thing. Yet there have to be reasonable limits. And the Europeans and the Canadians are now finding out just exactly what that's like.
Right. Yeah.
And reasonable people start talking about reasonable restrictions.
I want to touch on your article, which is a fantastic article about financial conspiracy in this month's magazine. And a lot of what you wrote on there is things that I've been screaming about. The idea of a global control of the economy and currency. They have been trying to destroy the dollar every which way possible. And they're getting pretty close with the new smart devices and central banking and everything else. A lot of this starting back in, I believe, 1933, World War II, with the German banker getting together with the Bank of England. And that started the ball rolling globally. With our new technology we have here, the new smart devices and computers and everything else we have, data centers, it's now going to be easier to see what you're doing when you're doing it. China already employs this method where they can tell on the person's smart device or pulse meter or whatever what that person's mood is when they work past a certain billboard, whether they're favorable to it or not. They can track their individuals by seeing what transactions they're doing, who they're speaking, even what websites they're trying to gain access to. So if you don't comply with their specific demands for your behavior, you have no job, you have no place to live, and you can't access any money. It's happening there already. And if they destroy our dollar and we go with a global currency, what will happen to us as Americans? But there is one thing, I pulled it out here in South Carolina, it's right in front of me. We're attempting to pass a bill, H5538, the Guaranteed Banking Act. So no matter what your religious faith, your political aspects, whatever, you cannot be denied a banking account that is unbiased.
Yeah, I've heard something about that. And yeah, I mean, it sounds like a sensible piece of legislation. I don't know how much time we have to talk about banking and finance. That's a subject near and dear to my heart, but it is pretty complex and involved. I guess I would just say that the destruction of the dollar of which you speak began with the inception of the Federal Reserve System, which was itself primarily planned out by certain European banking elites in concert with American banking and political elites. And it was done in secret and then sold to the American public as a novel idea. But again, a central bank with a currency monopoly is an old world idea, another one, right? It was invented by, the first one was the Bank of Sweden, followed very closely by the Bank of England, which is really kind of the template for the whole thing. And the Bank of England became, morphed into the official state Bank of England after the South Sea bubble, as a period of that. And so that was in the early 1700s, 1720, I guess it was. Anyway, and so from that day to this, the old world has been studying the science of how, what G. Arthur Griffin once called the Mandrake mechanism, how to make money out of nothing, or in this case, actually to make money out of debt, but to repudiate the system consecrated by thousands of years of experience of pegging money to some sort of scarce commodity like gold or silver as a means not only of guaranteeing its divisibility, portability, and overall quality, but also restraining the state and banking elites from creating it at random and benefiting from that process.
Oh, well, thank you, Richard Nixon, for taking that away from us. Another thing I screamed at the
final,
TV about.
Yeah, we don't have time to talk about all of that, but yeah, there were a number of mileposts. So the inception of the Federal Reserve, and then of course, one of the things FDR did upon becoming president was take America off the gold standard, except for foreign holders of American currency. Basically, ordinary Americans couldn't own gold anymore, but foreigners
Your
still
jewelry, everything. They took everything.
Yeah, and so that tenuous last remnant of the gold standard, which was maintained through Bretton Woods at the end of World War II, up until the Nixon administration, was finally ended by Nixon. And we now live in a world that's awash in completely fiat American dollars, meaning paper money.
Quantitative easing.
Yeah, sure. So this is, people think that inflation is an unalloyed evil, and it is, but it does benefit a certain group of people, namely the people whose assets are parked closest to the money spigots, because when you create new money, you don't just throw it in bales out of a helicopter. Vivid metaphors to the contrary. That's not how it works. It is instead injected at certain key authorized institutions that the Fed and the U.S. Treasury transact with directly to buy and sell government debt, right? And so people who have money at those, and they're all money center, in the United States, they're all, U.S. money center banks in New York City. So people have, that's part of the reason that New York continues to defy economic gravity and elect socialist mayors and impose a wide panoply of socialist policies, and yet continue somehow to stay afloat and maintain their vitality. It's because the whole system is centered in New York. The New York Federal Reserve Bank is where all of the gold, all the assets of the Fed are located. It's the center of that activity. And all of the banks that the Fed works with when it wants to, basically purchase secondary government debt and create new money to pay for it, i.e. inflate it, is all transacted through certain money center banks in New York City. So that's what's going on. So obviously people who are associated with that, they make out like bandits. They love inflation, because guess what? The same inflation, the same phenomenon that causes over time the cost of gas and groceries to rise is also responsible for driving up housing prices and stock prices and bond prices and commodity prices. It's all an inflationary bubble, as Peter Schiff will, tries to remind anyone who listens to him, right? But that's how it is. But certain people, even you can benefit from that for a while. If you start flipping houses or doing all these other weird, irrational things that people do in an inflationary economy, you too can make money for a while. And so, but the problem with inflation is it completely distorts people's perception of reality, and not just economic reality. It has completely transformed our culture. Cardinal values like thrift are no longer considered important. Thrift and solvency are now discarded in favor of profligacy and debt as the ways to achieve success. And so that also weakens and saps, weakens the body politic, saps public morale over time, because of course, you can't maintain that state of affairs forever. Sooner or later, you're going to have a 2007, 2008 type of collapse, and people lose a lot of money and wonder why the economy collapses, except the super rich just become a lot richer and everybody else is a little bit poorer. And this is a state of affairs that's been in place for generations now. And it's the reason that even though collectively our standard of living has increased, that's, thanks to technological advances, that is undoubtedly the case. But it's also true that more than ever before, we have a smaller and smaller group of ultra elites, who control far more wealth relative to the rest of us than the Rockefellers and the J. Paul Gettys ever did in their day.
No, and that's one thing that you wrote about in your article, and what's inside this magazine, that Jeffrey Epstein, what happened with his files and everything else, was only the precursor to start opening the curtain to show what's going on behind, to see the Wizard of Oz, basically, to do. And now the curtain is starting to part. And here the New American Magazine is also exposing a lot more in depth. So I think the American public is going to be absolutely stunned to find how much of our society and our government is now controlled, not just nationwide, but globally, by these elite individuals.
Well, I want to say publicly thank you to Jeffrey Epstein for bringing people's attention to this. I mean, what a creep! But at least, and I have to say he was small fry. We have to understand. But the Epstein affair has probably more than any other single event really, I think, red-pilled a lot of people and shown people that this level of malign collusion and conspiracy at the up at the highest levels of society is not figmentary. It's not something made up by the tinfoil hat crowd. It's a real thing, and there's a lot we don't know about these malefactors. I mean, whom did Jeffrey Epstein report to? And the jejune answer, oh well, he was a Mossad asset, blah 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 blah. Again, the Mossad and the CIA are, I think, relatively minor players in all of this. There are much grander designs at stake here, and this is, I think, part of the reality of the elites that people don't want to acknowledge. Most people, they look at the elites, they chafe under the yoke. They're maybe jealous of their wealth and attainments, but they say, "But yeah, we make this assumption that they're basically kind of, wealthier and more ambitious versions of us," and they're not.
Yeah.
I like to tell people, you may admire this politician or that movie actor or that captain of industry because they support the party you support, or they've done something that they're a benefactor of some cause that you are in sync with. But almost without exception, these are not people that you would want to have at a backyard barbecue or that you would trust alone with your teenage daughter. That's what it comes down to. There is and we see this, the Epstein files are very revelatory in this regard about the amorality, anti-morality of these people. And this applies doubly to the globalists of whom we've been speaking. These people that show up at places like the World Economic Forum, we see the suit and tie, we see the dignitaries, the stretched limousines, the trappings of power. We don't see the drug parties, the orgies, all the other things that they do behind the scenes because they can. Okay, but they do, and every now and then the curtain's drawn back a little bit. But so that's even if everything I've been saying about about the globalism is even if it were true that maybe a world government is the only way to peace, which I don't believe is true. I don't think it's true at all. The fatal problem is you'd have people like this in charge. You'd have people like that running the show. Just ask the Russians or the Chinese or the Cambodians how that works out, or the people of Iran right now. That's what you get. People like that. They always wear the trappings of dignity, and they profess allegiance to goals higher themselves. And then it turns out they're just grimy little whoremongers behind the scenes when you get to know. I mean, excuse me for sounding crude, but if you read about Kim Jong-un, who's nothing if not a doctrinaire, adherent of Juche, the North Korean theory of self-reliance and communism, all this, behind the scenes, he's got the women and the drugs and everything else. He just keeps it completely hidden, and those are the kind of people you get, unfortunately.
Yeah, the American public thinks that even though they're wealthy and they're of privilege, they're knowledgeable. They know more than us, so they're better than us. So we're just going to listen to whatever they say, and they think of it all as glamour, like that thing at the Met the other day. But it's not. It's all a facade. And once you take that facade off and you see who they really are as individuals, it would frighten the bejesus out of the average American.
Oh, absolutely. They're terrifying. I mean, and all the sneering about Pizzagate and all this stuff and all these rumors that the world is secretly run by pedophiles and Satanists are absurd. Well, it's kind of looking like there's a lot more truth than not. I mean, we don't know the details, but there's an awful lot of that going on. This is truly a fallen world, and I think part of the way to wisdom, unfortunately, where understanding politics is concerned, and frankly becoming a better informed citizen of the United States, which is what we need to sustain a republic, is to frankly acknowledge that this is the state of the human race. These are the kinds of people who are ineluctably drawn to power the more power you give them. We've always had perverts, heaven knows, and weird, scary people, but I mean, the abuse of children is certainly not a new thing. But now you have this going on in high places, systematically being covered up and facilitated by individuals like Epstein. And so what does that tell you? Well, this is the inevitable concomitant of creating this enormous government with all of this power, the most powerful government the world has ever seen. Wouldn't the founders turn over in their graves if they knew that? That was the last thing they intended doing. And they say with great power comes great responsibility. The old, I think the Marvel Comics thing. Yeah, well, with great power comes great corruption.
Yeah,
is the true way of things. And so the only way to mitigate this is to contract that power as far as possible, particularly at the federal level. And even then, you're going to get some corrupt individuals, obviously. But you're not going to get. I mean, we've had presidents in the past. Probably Calvin Coolidge was the most recent, who were genuinely decent, modest human beings who didn't really like being president very much, but kind of thought it was their duty when it fell on the mantle fell on them. Franklin Pierce was another. Men who, in many cases, would not have been recognized by the average American if they walked past them on the street. To what we have today, which is a series of, we have the president is the most powerful man in the world, and everybody frankly acknowledges this, whether it's Republican or Democrat. The presidency has evolved into an elective Caesarship. And this is not a good thing, but then it attracts people who want to be Caesar.
Yeah.
Even people.
Well said. We're down to our last minute, Steve. And this has been so fantastic. I knew I was going to have a lot of fun with you when I saw you with my friend Bill. So I'm glad that we did have you here. We will welcome you back at any time.
Let me know. You know how to reach, how to contact me.
Yeah, and I was going to do more stuff with Hannah, but I'm going to have to do that next week.
I'm sorry, Hannah.
It's all right. No, it's fine. I'm here every week, so no, you stole the spotlight, and rightfully so. You were very well spoken, and you really dived into a lot of different topics. So I think our viewers are going to love it.
Absolutely. And people can find you at the New American Magazine, where you are the publisher. Steve, thank you.
Yes, it's
God bless you.
newamerican.com. And you can subscribe right there. It's a monthly magazine.
All right. Thank you, Steve. And God bless. Bye. All right. This is, we're actually about a minute over at the end. But Hannah, we will be back next week.
Oh, yeah.
And we'll have a lot of fun.
Yeah,
anyway.
For sure. So the New American is not a book. I just want our viewers to know, because the way it was introduced in the beginning, I thought it was a book he had just written. It's a magazine. So if you guys are interested in subscribing to his magazine, like he said, go online and you'll be able to find it.
Yeah, it's very, very good. This month is absolutely excellent. So I'm still reading it. Until then, Hannah, I'm going to say good night and God bless.